The chill wind sweeping off Lake Michigan carried more than just the scent of approaching winter that October morning in 1994. It whispered a secret, a horror unveiled in the desolate heart of Chicago's Englewood neighborhood, a secret that would fester for nearly 3 decades before its brutal truth was finally dragged into the blinding light. For 20 years, Monique Johnson had been an absence, a ghost in the collective memory, a name etched onto a mother's broken heart, her story reduced to a thick, dusty file marked cold. She was vibrant, an aspiring medical student with a laugh that could chase away any shadow, a future brimming with promise. But that promise was brutally extinguished, leaving behind only questions, sorrow, and a gnawing sense of injustice. Could a ghost from Chicago's past, a shadow dismissed for nearly 3 decades, finally have found its face? The answer, when it finally arrived, would shatter a community and force a painful reevaluation of justice delayed. Before we delve into this chilling narrative, tell us, where are you watching from today? And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories like Monique's to light. The story begins in a Chicago that, even then, was a city of stark contrasts, gleaming skyscrapers downtown, but in neighborhoods like Englewood, a pervasive sense of abandonment. It was Monday, October 17, 1994. The air was crisp, hinting at the winter that would soon envelop the city in its frigid embrace. Monique Johnson, a bright, ambitious 20-year-old, had spent her evening, as she often did, immersed in the world of books and knowledge at the Harold Washington Library. She was a pre-med student at the University of Illinois at Chicago, her dreams as vast and open as the prairie sky. After her study session, she walked a familiar path to her part-time job at a local diner, a place where the aroma of coffee and sizzling bacon was as comforting as the friendly faces of her coworkers. She finished her shift around 10:30 p.m., waved goodbye to her colleague, Jamal, promising to see him Wednesday, and stepped out into the cool, dark Chicago night. Her route home was routine, a path she'd walked countless times, taking her through a mixture of residential streets and commercial stretches, usually bustling, but growing quieter as the hour deepened. She carried her worn leather backpack, filled with textbooks and her ambitions, a silent testament to her dedication. Her mother, Eleanor Johnson, a woman whose love for her daughter was an almost palpable force, expected her home by 11 p.m. That Monday night, however, 11 p.m. came and went, then 11:30 p.m., then midnight. Each tick of the clock was a hammer blow against Eleanor's heart. Monique was meticulous, always on time, always called if she was delayed. This silence was unnatural, a gaping void where her daughter's familiar voice should have been. Eleanor's initial unease quickly spiraled into a cold dread. She called Monique's friends, her coworker Jamal, desperate for any shred of information. No one had seen her since she left the diner. Panic, a visceral, suffocating wave, consumed Eleanor. By 2 a.m., with no sign of Monique, Eleanor, accompanied by her eldest son, Michael, drove to the nearest police precinct. The desk sergeant, weary from a long shift, listened with an air of practiced detachment. "She's probably just with friends, ma'am," he'd said, a dismissive wave of his hand. "Young people, they lose track of time." The implication hung heavy in the air. Another black girl, probably just off somewhere, not worth immediate alarm. Eleanor, however, knew her daughter. Monique was not just off somewhere. She was diligent, responsible, and fiercely independent, but not reckless. The officers took a report, a few perfunctory questions, and told her to wait 24 hours. The rule, they explained, for adults. It was a rule designed for runaways, for people choosing to disappear, not for a diligent student who vanished without a trace from her established routine. This initial dismissiveness was a bitter pill for the Johnson family to swallow, sowing the first seeds of distrust in a system that seemed unwilling to see their daughter as anything more than a statistic. For the next 2 days, the family conducted their own frantic search. Michael plastered flyers with Monique's beaming face across Inglewood. They called hospitals, shelters, knocking on doors of anyone who might have seen her. Each dead end twisted the knife of uncertainty deeper. The neighborhood, usually alive with the hum of daily life, felt colder, the eyes of passers-by holding a mixture of pity and fear. No one admitted to seeing anything. No one had any helpful information. The air in the Johnson household grew heavy, thick with unspoken fears and the chilling silence of Monique's empty room. The scent of her favorite jasmine lotion still lingered faintly, a cruel reminder of her presence. Eleanor found herself clutching Monique's favorite sweater, burying her face in its fabric, desperately trying to conjure her daughter's scent, her essence, back into existence. Each sunrise brought not hope, but a deeper, more profound terror. Then came the grim dawn of Wednesday, October 19th. A postal worker, Mark Henderson, on his morning route, cut through a narrow, overgrown vacant lot on West 60th Street, a shortcut he'd used for years to avoid the busy street. The lot, a forgotten scar on the urban landscape, was a tangled mess of waist-high weeds, discarded tires, and rusted appliances, a testament to neglect. As Henderson navigated the uneven ground, his boots snagged on something soft, yielding. He glanced down, his eyes scanning the debris, and then he saw it, a flash of familiar crimson fabric, partially hidden beneath a crumpled tarp and overgrown kudzu. A gasp escaped his lips, sharp and involuntary. It was a woman's hand, pale and unnaturally still, protruding from the makeshift shroud. He stumbled back, adrenaline coursing through him, the stench of damp earth and something far more horrifying assaulting his senses. His heart hammered against his ribs. He immediately fumbled for the police dispatcher on his radio, his voice strained and barely comprehensible. Within minutes, the vacant lot transformed into a beehive of activity. Blue and white squad cars converged, their flashing lights painting the pre-dawn darkness in an urgent, pulsating rhythm. Detectives, crime scene technicians, and uniformed officers cordoned off the area with yellow tape, creating an eerie perimeter around the macabre discovery. The morning commute slowed to a crawl as curious neighbors and onlookers gathered at the edges, their faces etched with morbid fascination and a dawning horror. The body was identified quickly. It was Monique. Her familiar crimson sweater, the worn leather backpack found nearby, the distinctive silver locket around her neck, there was no doubt. The detectives on the scene, Frank Miller and his partner, Sergeant Jenkins, approached the body with a somber reverence, their expressions grim. Monique lay partially clothed, a single devastating wound to her head, evidence of extreme violence. Her eyes were closed, her face peaceful, almost serene in its stillness, a stark contrast to the brutal reality of her death. The crime scene was meticulously processed, every detail scrutinized under the harsh glare of portable floodlights. Photographs were taken from every angle, measurements meticulously recorded. They searched for footprints, tire tracks, any discarded item that might offer a clue. The ground beneath her was damp, absorbing the chill, and it seemed to clutch at any potential evidence, making recovery difficult. The air was heavy with the smell of damp earth, decay, and a faint metallic tang, the unmistakable scent of old blood. The initial autopsy confirmed the cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with a severe blow. There were also signs of sexual assault, a detail that deepened the horror and suggested a deeply personal, violating crime rather than a random act of violence. The medical examiner, Dr. Angela Reed worked with a grim determination, collecting samples, hair, fibers, skin cells, fluid traces, knowing that these microscopic details could be the silent witnesses that ultimately spoke for Monique. However, in 1994, DNA technology, while emerging, was not as sophisticated or widely available as it is today. Samples were collected and preserved, but the ability to derive a full, robust DNA profile from degraded or minuscule traces was still years away. This technological limitation would become a crucial factor in the case's long, agonizing journey into the cold file. The lack of immediate, obvious leads was frustrating. There were no clear fingerprints, no eyewitnesses to the abduction or murder. The vacant lot, a transient, isolated space, offered little in the way of immediate clues. The neighborhood, already tight-lipped and wary of police, seemed to retreat further into itself. Detectives Miller and Jenkins embarked on a rigorous, exhaustive investigation. They interviewed everyone: Monique's family, her friends, her co-workers at the diner, her professors at UIC, her neighbors, anyone who might have seen her in the days leading up to her disappearance. Each interview was a delicate dance, trying to coax information from a community often distrustful of law enforcement, a distrust exacerbated by years of perceived neglect and racial bias. Eleanor Johnson, grief-stricken and reeling, recounted every detail of that Monday night, her voice trembling but resolute. She spoke of Monique's dreams, her unwavering commitment to her studies, her deep love for her family. Michael, Monique's older brother, choked back tears as he described their sister's vibrant spirit, her infectious laugh. They provided photos, spoke of her habits, her friends, her relationships. The first person of interest, as is often the case, was Monique's boyfriend, David Carter, a kind, quiet young man, also a student at UIC. He had been with Monique earlier that Monday, dropping her off at the library. He had an alibi for the time of her disappearance, backed up by his roommates. He was cooperative, heartbroken, and his grief seemed genuine. Detectives spent hours with him, scrutinizing his every word, his body language. They cleared him, convinced he was not involved. Next, they looked at an ex-boyfriend, Mark Evans, who had a history of possessiveness. He had reportedly been seen lingering near the library a few times in the weeks prior to Monique's disappearance, though she had broken up with him months earlier. He initially proved difficult to locate, raising suspicions. When they finally tracked him down in a neighboring suburb, he provided a flimsy alibi. He had been out driving around alone. But after intense questioning and without any physical evidence to link him to the crime, he too was eventually ruled out, though a shadow of doubt lingered in the minds of some detectives. The net widened. Police spoke to known offenders in the area, individuals with histories of violence, particularly against women. They canvassed door to door, showing Monique's picture, asking if anyone had seen anything unusual. The response was often a shrug, a shake of the head, or a quick, nervous closing of a door. The no-snitching culture, born of a complex interplay of fear, loyalty, and historical mistreatment by law enforcement, was a formidable barrier. Some residents, older men and women who had lived in Inglewood for decades, whispered about a man seen loitering near the vacant lot in the evenings, a drifter known for his erratic behavior. Others mentioned a dilapidated dark blue pickup truck that was often parked suspiciously in the area, sometimes at odd hours, though no one could provide a license plate number or a clear description of its driver. These fleeting, unverified tips often led to dead ends, consuming precious time and resources. The media, initially drawn by the tragic loss of a promising young woman, published a few articles, but the story quickly faded from the headlines. There were other crimes, other tragedies, other news cycles. Monique's family, however, never gave up. They held vigils, handed out flyers, organized community meetings. Eleanor became a tireless advocate, her quiet determination fueled by a mother's fierce love. She often found herself at the police station, a familiar figure in the waiting room asking for updates, her heart sinking with each non-committal response. Detective Miller, a seasoned veteran with a weary but honest gaze, often bore the brunt of her frustration. He genuinely empathized, but his hands were often tied by the limitations of the evidence, the lack of breakthroughs, and the sheer volume of other violent crimes demanding attention in a city grappling with high crime rates. The case grew colder with each passing day. Leads dwindled. The initial fervor of the investigation gave way to the slow, agonizing crawl of bureaucracy and unanswered prayers. The file, once active, was eventually relegated to a cabinet gathering dust, a symbol of a life unavenged, a mystery unsolved. The years bled into decades. 1994 turned into 2004, then 2014 and beyond. For the Johnson family, time did not heal all wounds. It merely dulled the edges, leaving a raw, aching core of grief and unanswered questions. Eleanor's health deteriorated, the constant stress and unresolved sorrow taking a toll on her once robust spirit. Michael, now a father himself, carried the weight of his sister's memory, often visiting the desolate vacant lot, now a little less overgrown, but still haunted by the past, laying flowers on the spot where her life ended. The physical landscape of Inglewood changed. Some buildings were torn down, others boarded up. But the emotional landscape of the community, scarred by Monique's death and so many others, remained. The initial mistrust in law enforcement deepened, cementing the belief that certain lives, especially those of Black women and girls, were simply not prioritized. Justice delayed is justice denied became a bitter mantra. But while the case lay dormant, the world of forensic science underwent a quiet revolution. DNA technology, once a nascent field, exploded with possibilities. New techniques emerged, allowing scientists to extract full DNA profiles from smaller, more degraded samples. Familial DNA searching, forensic genealogy, touch DNA analysis, these were tools unimaginable in 1994, now offering hope for countless cold cases across the nation. In 2018, spurred by a new initiative to re-examine unsolved cases, the Chicago Police Department's newly formed Cold Case Unit, a small but dedicated team, pulled Monique Johnson's file from the archives. It was thick, heavy with reports, witness statements, crime scene photos, and the chilling emptiness of an unresolved investigation. Detective Sarah Evans, a meticulous and empathetic investigator, was assigned to the case. She immersed herself in the details, poring over every page, every grainy photograph, trying to see what might have been missed, what new perspective time and technology could offer. One particular piece of evidence caught her eye: a microscopic semen sample collected from Monique's body during the 1994 autopsy, meticulously preserved, though its full potential was unknown at the time. This sample, too small and degraded for comprehensive analysis back then, was now a beacon of hope. Detective Evans arranged for its resubmission to the state crime lab, requesting the most advanced DNA sequencing available. The anticipation was excruciating. Weeks turned into months. The lab technicians worked diligently, employing sophisticated techniques to amplify the minute DNA fragments, painstakingly piecing together a genetic profile. Then, in the early months of 2023, the call came. A hit. Not a direct hit in the CODIS National DNA Database, which houses profiles of convicted offenders, but a familial match. The partial profile generated from Monique's case connected to a distant relative already in the database, a relative with a minor offense from another state. This was a critical lead, a thread finally pulled from the tangled knot of the past. The familial match led investigators down a complex genetic tree, branching out through public genealogy databases and birth records. The search was painstaking, requiring not just scientific acumen, but also old-fashioned detective work, poring over census records and family trees. They narrowed down the possibilities, focusing on individuals who were living in or had connections to the Inglewood area in 1994. Slowly, painstakingly, a name began to emerge from the shadows: Arthur "Art" Peterson. The name resonated with a chilling familiarity, not because he was a known criminal, but because of his ordinary life. He was 71 years old now, a seemingly quiet, retired postal worker. He had lived in Inglewood for most of his life, only a few blocks from Monique's home and even closer to the vacant lot where she was found. He was a familiar face, someone who had seen Monique grow up, someone who had probably passed her on the street countless times. He was married, a grandfather, a man who, by all outward appearances, had led an unremarkable, law-abiding life. He even volunteered at a local community center. The irony was a cruel twist. The killer had been hiding in plain sight for decades, a ghost among the living. Detective Evans and her team launched a discreet but intense surveillance operation. They watched Peterson, observing his daily routines. They gathered discarded items from his trash, meticulously collecting samples that could be tested for his DNA. The tension mounted with each passing day. The collected DNA samples were sent to the lab. The waiting period was agonizing, a silent countdown. Then the confirmation arrived, a full DNA match. The semen sample found on Monique Johnson's body 30 years ago unequivocally matched Arthur Peterson. The cold case, frozen in time, had suddenly thawed, revealing its horrifying truth. The weight of 3 decades of unresolved grief, of an unpunished crime, of a community's lingering pain, crashed down in that single, irrefutable scientific link. The pieces of the puzzle, once scattered and seemingly disconnected, now clicked into place with a terrifying precision. On a Tuesday morning in late 2023, a team of Chicago police officers, led by Detective Evans, quietly approached Arthur Peterson's modest brick home. The autumn leaves were falling, swirling around their feet as they walked up the familiar path. Peterson, startled, answered the door, his face a mask of confusion, then slowly, undeniably, fear. He was brought in for questioning, sitting across from Detective Evans in a stark, windowless interrogation room. The air was thick with unspoken history. For hours he maintained his innocence, his voice wavering with practiced calm. But when confronted with the irrefutable DNA evidence, the carefully constructed facade began to crumble. His eyes darted nervously, his hands trembled. He eventually admitted to being in the vacant lot that night, acknowledging a struggle, but still attempting to downplay his involvement, shifting blame, clinging to a thread of denial. But the evidence was overwhelming. The truth, meticulously uncovered by science and relentless detective work, was inescapable. Arthur Peterson was arrested and charged with the murder and sexual assault of Monique Johnson. The news broke like a thunderclap across Chicago, particularly within the Black community in Inglewood. A press conference was swiftly called. Detective Evans, standing beside the chief of police, her voice steady but her eyes reflecting the immense weight of the moment, announced the arrest. She detailed the decades-long journey, the technological advancements, the tireless work of the cold case unit, and the crucial role of DNA evidence. But it was Eleanor Johnson, frail but dignified, her face etched with a lifetime of sorrow, who truly captured the heart of the announcement. She stood at the podium, gripping a framed photograph of Monique, her daughter's smiling face a stark contrast to the tears streaming down Eleanor's cheeks. Her voice, though trembling, resonated with an almost unbearable mixture of relief and renewed anguish. 30 years, she whispered, her words raw with emotion. 30 years we waited. 30 years we prayed. Monique can finally rest. But the pain will always be here. Her words echoed not just her own grief, but the collective trauma of a community that had mourned in silence for far too long. The reaction was immediate and profound. Stunned disbelief rippled through the neighborhood. Arthur Peterson? Art? The quiet man who lived down the street? The volunteer at the community center? The man who had been a silent, insidious presence in their lives for decades? The shock was palpable, a chilling realization that evil could wear such an ordinary, unassuming face. There was anger, fierce and righteous, that it had taken so long, that Monique's family had suffered for generations without answers. But there was also a profound, if bittersweet, sense of closure, a tentative step towards justice. The arrest didn't bring Monique back, but it finally, belatedly, gave her story a voice and her family a name to attach to their endless sorrow. The trial of Arthur Peterson unfolded in the shadow of Monique Johnson's ghost. The courtroom, often an arena of legal theatrics, became a solemn space for remembering a life tragically cut short. Prosecutors laid out a meticulous case, building on the foundation of the irrefutable DNA evidence. They presented the original crime scene photos, the medical examiner's detailed report from 1994, and the new, compelling forensic analysis that linked Peterson directly to the crime. Witnesses from 1994, now decades older, were called to testify. Their memories often hazy, but their emotions still raw. They spoke of Monique's character, of the fear that gripped Englewood, of the pervasive sense of injustice. The defense, struggling against the weight of the evidence, attempted to sow seeds of doubt about the chain of custody of the DNA, the possibility of contamination, or the age of the sample. But these arguments faltered under the rigorous scrutiny of the prosecution and the scientific certainty presented by the forensic experts. During the proceedings, disturbing details emerged about Peterson's past. While he had no major criminal convictions prior to 1994, a deeper dive into his history revealed a pattern of concerning, albeit unproven, behaviors. Whispers from former acquaintances spoke of a volatile temper beneath his quiet demeanor, of unsettling incidents with women that were never formally reported or investigated. These were not enough to convict him on their own, but they painted a grim picture, suggesting a darkness that had long remained hidden. The prosecution argued that Peterson, familiar with the area and Monique's routine, had likely targeted her, seeing an opportunity in the quiet, unlit street near the vacant lot. They painted a picture of a predatory act, a swift, brutal assault that left a vibrant life extinguished and a community in perpetual mourning. The emotional climax of the trial came with Eleanor Johnson's testimony. She spoke not of hatred, but of the crushing burden of unanswered questions, of holidays spent with an empty chair, of a mother's endless ache for her lost child. She described the future Monique had planned, the medical career she envisioned, the lives she would have touched. Her words were a poignant testament to the profound ripple effect of violent crime, not just on the victim, but on every life she touched, every dream she held. After weeks of testimony, the jury returned a guilty verdict. Arthur Peterson was convicted of Monique Johnson's murder and sexual assault. The verdict brought a surge of relief, a collective exhale from the courtroom and from the community watching closely. For Eleanor, it was not joy, but a profound, weary sense of peace. Justice, though agonizingly slow, had finally arrived. Peterson was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, ensuring he would spend the remainder of his life behind bars, a testament to the fact that some crimes, no matter how old, can still find their reckoning. Monique's case, now officially closed, left an indelible mark on Chicago. It highlighted not only the incredible advancements in forensic science, but also the enduring challenges of cold case investigations, particularly in communities historically marginalized. It forced a critical reevaluation of past policing practices, acknowledging the systemic biases that allowed cases like Monique's to languish for so long. The belated arrest of Arthur Peterson served as a stark reminder that shadows from the past can linger for decades, and that sometimes the most sinister truths are hidden behind the most ordinary faces. The community, though still scarred, found a measure of solace in knowing that Monique's killer had finally been identified, that her name was no longer just a cold case file, but a symbol of perseverance and the relentless pursuit of justice. But even with an arrest, does the full truth ever truly emerge from the shadows of such a long-forgotten night? What deeper motives, what unseen forces drove Arthur Peterson to commit such a heinous act? And what unanswered questions still linger in the heart of Chicago, echoing through the quiet streets of Inglewood, a constant reminder of Monique Johnson's lost promise and the enduring mystery of human darkness? The mystery of human darkness might remain, but the light of truth, however belated, would always find a way to shine. The chilling question of why hung heavy in the air, a phantom limb of the investigation that science could not quite grasp. Arthur Peterson remained a sphinx-like figure, his motivations veiled behind decades of silence and a lifetime of carefully constructed normalcy. Psychologists and criminal profilers would later attempt to dissect his psyche, offering theories ranging from deeply repressed rage to a perverse sense of entitlement. Was it a spur-of-the-moment act, an impulsive explosion of violence fueled by opportunity, or a darker, premeditated predation? The prosecution argued for the latter, painting him as a calculating individual who knew the area, observed routines, and chose his moment with chilling precision. He had lived in the neighborhood for decades, a familiar fixture, perhaps even nodding to Monique or her family in passing. This proximity, this insidious familiarity, was perhaps the most disturbing revelation for Inglewood residents. How many times had Peterson walked past the makeshift memorial at the vacant lot, his secret held tight, watching the grief unfold around him? The man who once volunteered at the community center, teaching children chess, now stood exposed as a predator. It painted a terrifying picture of the monster next door, eroding the fragile trust that holds neighborhoods together. The idea that evil could be so mundane, so outwardly unremarkable, was a profound and unsettling lesson for many. Peterson's stoic demeanor during the trial, his refusal to offer a genuine apology or explanation beyond a vague acknowledgement of a struggle, only deepened the mystery of his inner world. He offered no remorse that resonated, no insight into the darkness he harbored, leaving the Johnson family and the community to grapple with an incomplete understanding of their tormentor. Peterson's initial days in prison were marked by the same unsettling stoicism he displayed in court. He adapted quickly to the regimented life, a man who had perfected the art of blending in, of making himself unremarkable. His appeals, as expected, were swiftly denied. His legal team had attempted to argue ineffective counsel and issues with the chain of custody for the aging DNA sample, but the meticulous documentation from both 1994 and the 2023 re-examination held firm under scrutiny. During his final sentencing hearing, Peterson, now a gaunt, graying figure in an orange jumpsuit, made a rambling, self-pitying statement. He spoke vaguely of a misunderstanding, of being wrongly accused, still refusing to utter Monique's name or acknowledge the depth of his transgression. He lamented the ruin of his good name, a stark and chilling display of narcissism that solidified the judge's resolve. The judge, in delivering the maximum sentence, spoke eloquently about the sanctity of human life, the decades of pain inflicted upon the Johnson family, and the profound societal betrayal represented by Peterson's actions. She emphasized that while the law allowed for justice, it could never fully restore what was lost, but it could, at least, ensure that he could never harm another. Peterson was transferred to a maximum security state correctional facility, destined to live out his remaining years behind cold steel and concrete walls, his once secret life now exposed for the heinous act it contained. But for Eleanor Johnson, and for the detectives who had chased his shadow for so long, his silence was a wound that festered. What other secrets did he take to his grave? What other shadows did he cast? This lingering question fueled a post-conviction deep dive by Detective Evans and her cold case unit. They understood that serial offenders rarely commit just one act. Peterson's quiet life now seemed a calculated facade, a perfect cover for intermittent, opportunistic violence. They spent months re-examining every unsolved female homicide and sexual assault in the Chicago area from the 1970s through the early 2000s, specifically looking for patterns that might align with Peterson's MO: blunt force trauma, sexual assault, bodies found in vacant lots or secluded areas. The challenge was immense. Chicago's violent crime rates were tragically high during those decades, and many older cases lacked the forensic preservation that Monique's case, against all odds, had maintained. They cross-referenced Peterson's known addresses, his postal routes, and even his casual social circles with these cold files. They found a handful of cases that, while not definitively linked, raised unsettling questions. There was the 1982 unsolved murder of a young woman named Brenda Jenkins, found in a deserted alleyway just a few miles from one of Peterson's former residences. The cause of death was similar, and while no viable DNA had been recovered, the similarities were eerie. Another case, from 1990, involved a woman who had been violently assaulted and left for dead in a park, but survived, unable to identify her attacker beyond a vague description of a quiet, older man. The unit painstakingly tracked down this survivor, now an elderly woman, who, upon seeing Peterson's photograph, experienced a visible tremor. While she couldn't make a positive identification due to the trauma and the passage of time, her reaction was deeply disturbing. The unit also uncovered several less severe but still concerning incidents from Peterson's younger years that had never led to charges. A former girlfriend from the late 60s who reported aggressive and controlling behavior. A public disturbance arrest in the 70s involving a drunken altercation with a woman dismissed as disorderly conduct. Each fragment, though not strong enough for new charges, painted a portrait of a man with a hidden capacity for violence, a predator who had somehow managed to evade serious legal consequence for decades. The unit compiled a comprehensive psychological profile suggesting a deeply repressed rage that would erupt sporadically, often against vulnerable targets, a man who carefully chose his moments and meticulously covered his tracks. They knew that many victims of such hidden predators never received justice, their stories lost to time and insufficient evidence. Monique's case was a victory, but it also opened a window into a potentially larger, more terrifying truth. For Eleanor Johnson, the conviction brought a fragile peace, but it did not end her journey. Instead, it transformed her grief into an enduring, powerful mission. She refused to let Monique's story be just a footnote in Chicago's grim history. She co-founded the Monique's Legacy Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting families of missing and murdered persons, particularly in underserved communities. The foundation's work was multifaceted, born from Eleanor's own painful experiences. It provided vital emotional support, connecting grieving families with counselors and support groups. It offered practical legal guidance, helping navigate the often impenetrable labyrinth of law enforcement bureaucracy and ensuring families understood their rights and options. Crucially, the foundation established a cold case navigator program, training volunteers to act as liaisons between families and police departments, bridging the communication gap that Eleanor had felt so acutely for decades. They helped families push for forensic reexaminations, connected them with pro bono legal services, and assisted in organizing community searches and awareness campaigns. Eleanor herself became a tireless advocate, her voice now amplified by the weight of her experience and the undeniable triumph of her daughter's case. She traveled to other cities, sharing Monique's story not as a tragedy to be pitied, but as a catalyst for change. Her public speaking engagements challenged police departments to re-examine their cold cases with a renewed sense of urgency and to adopt more equitable practices in their initial responses to missing persons reports. She became a vocal critic of the 24-hour rule for adults, advocating passionately for its abolition, particularly when concerning young women who vanish from established routines. "The first hours are the most critical," she would often declare, her voice resonating with years of pent-up urgency. "Every minute lost is a trail gone cold, a life potentially saved, or at least a better chance at justice." Her powerful testimony often centered on the disparities in resources and attention, pointing out that certain lives, especially those of Black women and girls, were often tragically marginalized by the very systems meant to protect them. Her relationship with Detective Sarah Evans deepened, evolving from a professional interaction into one of profound mutual respect and friendship. Evans often spoke at the Foundation's events, sharing insights into the painstaking work of cold case investigations and highlighting the importance of community trust and cooperation. The bond between the grieving mother and the dedicated detective became a powerful symbol of collaboration between citizens and law enforcement, bridging a gap that had historically been fraught with tension and distrust. Eleanor's work not only honored Monique, but also offered solace and tangible help to countless other families grappling with similar heartache, ensuring that no one else would suffer the same decades-long silence that had defined her own quest for justice. The vacant lot on West 60th Street, once a desolate scar on the urban landscape, had been transformed. Monique's promise, as the community had lovingly named the garden, became a vibrant testament to resilience and remembrance. It was no longer just a place of mourning, but a living, breathing community hub. Local activists, artists, and families from Inglewood poured their collective energy into its creation. Overgrown weeds were replaced by meticulously planned flower beds, bursting with perennials and native wildflowers that thrived in Chicago's climate. Sturdy wooden benches, built by local carpentry students, invited quiet contemplation. A colorful mosaic mural depicting intertwining hands, blossoming flowers, and a soaring dove adorned a nearby brick wall, subtly incorporating Monique's likeness and name within its intricate patterns. Children from the local elementary school, many of whom had only known the story of Monique from their parents or teachers, helped plant new seeds each spring, learning about her not as a victim, but as a bright, ambitious student whose dreams were cruelly cut short, whose memory now spurred beauty and change. Annual remembrance ceremonies were held there every October 17th, the day Monique vanished. These gatherings became powerful events, drawing not just Inglewood residents, but advocates from across the city. Candles were lit, poems were read, and stories of Monique, and indeed of other lost loved ones, were shared, transforming individual grief into a collective act of healing and solidarity. The garden served as a poignant reminder that even from the darkest corners, hope could bloom and neglect could be overcome by collective will and enduring love. It was a space where tears could still be shed, but also where laughter could echo, where neighbors could gather, share stories, and forge connections that strengthened the fabric of Inglewood, ensuring that such a tragedy would never again be met with silence or indifference. The rich scent of blooming jasmine, Monique's favorite, was carefully cultivated, its delicate perfume a living, fragrant whisper of her enduring presence. The success of Monique Johnson's case was a significant turning point for the Chicago Police Department's cold case unit. Before her resolution, The unit, though staffed by dedicated detectives, had often struggled with limited resources, bureaucratic hurdles, and the sheer volume of unresolved cases. The high-profile resolution of a nearly three-decade-old case, directly attributable to the unit's perseverance and the application of cutting-edge DNA technology, provided irrefutable proof of its immense value. This led to a substantial increase in funding, a tangible commitment from the city to prioritize justice for long-forgotten victims. The unit was able to expand its team of detectives, bringing in specialists in forensic genealogy, digital forensics, and psychological profiling. They invested in state-of-the-art software for data analysis, enabling them to cross-reference cold cases with greater efficiency, identifying potential links, geographical patterns, and offender MOs that might have been missed in manual reviews. New protocols were rigorously implemented for the preservation and retesting of older evidence, recognizing that even the smallest, most degraded samples held the potential for breakthrough when revisited with evolving science. Detective Sarah Evans, now a seasoned expert in forensic genealogy and a nationally recognized figure, became a sought-after speaker at law enforcement conferences across the country. She shared the intricate nuances of applying these complex scientific methods to human tragedy, emphasizing that while technology was a powerful tool, it was the relentless human element, the determination of detectives, the unwavering advocacy of families, and the cooperation of communities that truly breathed life back into cold files. The unit's office, once a quiet repository of forgotten sorrows, now buzzed with a renewed sense of purpose, a tangible commitment to giving names to the nameless and answers to the agonizingly patient. They established stronger liaisons with the State Crime Lab and national forensic databases, streamlining the process of resubmitting evidence and pursuing familial DNA searches. Monique Johnson's case became a benchmark, a case study in resilience and the power of scientific innovation, proving that justice, though often delayed, did not have to be denied. The Monique Johnson case also ignited broader conversations within the media and policymaking circles, extending far beyond the city limits of Chicago. National news outlets, initially slow to cover the three-decade-old cold case, picked up the story with renewed vigor after Peterson's arrest, focusing not just on the scientific breakthrough, but on the socio-racial dynamics at play. Editorials in major newspapers and online publications discuss the disproportionate number of unsolved cases involving Black women and girls across the country, often contrasting the swift and extensive media coverage given to missing white women with a relative silence surrounding women of color. This prompted widespread calls for increased federal funding for cold case units nationwide and a critical review of how missing persons cases are initially handled, especially in communities of color, where historical distrust of law enforcement often hampered early investigations. Legislative initiatives began to take shape, inspired by Eleanor Johnson's tireless advocacy. In Illinois, a bill informally dubbed Monique's Law began to be drafted, proposing mandatory re-examination periods for unsolved homicides, particularly those with preserved DNA evidence, every 5 to 10 years. It also sought to establish clear, comprehensive guidelines for the ethical and effective use of forensic genealogy in such investigations, ensuring privacy concerns were balanced with the pursuit of justice. Furthermore, the proposed law included provisions for mandatory cultural sensitivity training for all officers responding to missing persons reports, aiming to eliminate the dismissive attitudes that Eleanor and so many other families had encountered. The legacy of Monique Johnson, once a tragic statistic, was steadily transforming into a powerful catalyst for systemic change, a testament to how one life, cruelly taken, could still ripple through time, demanding better. Her story became a national emblem for a movement dedicated to ensuring that no other family would have to wait 30 years for answers, that every life lost, regardless of background, received the full measure of justice. Even with the arrest, the conviction, and the flourishing garden, some shadows remained etched deep within the psyche of Inglewood. The revelation that Arthur Peterson, the quiet, unassuming man who had lived among them for decades, was Monique's killer left an indelible scar. It was a profound betrayal of trust, a chilling reminder that evil could wear such an ordinary face. That the monster next door was not just a terrifying trope, but a horrifying reality. The community grappled with the implications. How many times had Peterson passed them on the street? How many conversations had he overheard? How many children had he taught chess at the community center, all while harboring such a dark secret? This discovery eroded the fragile sense of safety that residents had struggled to rebuild after decades of urban decay and violence. It prompted a painful period of introspection, of questioning acquaintances, of re-evaluating long-held assumptions about their neighbors. While there was immense relief in the closure, there was also an enduring sense of unease, a reminder of the hidden darkness that can lurk beneath the veneer of normalcy. Therapists and community leaders organized dialogue sessions, helping residents process the complex emotions, anger, grief, relief, and a profound sense of violation. These forums allowed for communal healing, for shared remembrance, and for reaffirming the community's commitment to protecting its own. The story of Monique Johnson became a cautionary tale, but also a narrative of hope, emphasizing the importance of vigilance, of speaking out, and of never letting a life be forgotten. The long-term impact on trust, while slowly mending, would serve as a permanent lesson, ensuring that the shadows of that cold October night in 1994 would forever serve as a silent sentinel over Inglewood, a reminder of the past and a powerful spur for a safer, more just future. The story of Monique Johnson, however, transcended the personal tragedy. It became a narrative about hope in the face of despair, the triumph of perseverance, and the unyielding power of a mother's love to chase justice across decades. It was a story that forced Chicago, and indeed the nation, to confront uncomfortable truths about neglect and bias, while simultaneously celebrating the extraordinary dedication of those who refused to let Monique Johnson be forgotten. Her spirit, forever young, now lived not just in the memories of those who loved her, but in the enduring fight for justice for all, illuminating the path forward, one cold case at a time. The chill wind off Lake Michigan still carried whispers, but now among them was the gentle, resolute murmur of Monique's name, forever remembered, forever honored.